Alrighty, y'all, welcome back to Online AP Art History. Today we are reviewing the ancient Mediterranean because a lot of you guys requested it on that survey, which felt like ages ago. So, ancient Mediterranean has to do with the area around the Mediterranean Sea before the time of Jesus, essentially. So, we're looking at Egypt, we're looking at Greece, we're looking at Rome, we're looking at Persia, all of those surrounding territories. That's the ancient Mediterranean. Sorry that there's like autofocus. I'm going to keep kind of tapping for it to focus on the actual PowerPoint and not my face. Alright, first one we're going to talk about, let me angle out of the way a little bit, is the Code of Hammurabi. So you might remember it as the Stele of Hammurabi. So a stele is a rounded cylinder shape. So here goes my cylinder with sort of a round at the top. At the top we have a relief carving. It's fairly high relief. We see some element of undercutting. We see some strong shadows. So that's at the top of the stele. There's a zoom in right here. And then beneath that is cuneiform of 384 plus codes of law. Remember, this is our first example of a code of law in civilization. So let's go back to the top. So what we see are two figures. On the left is Hammurabi, who is the ruler at the time for Babylon. And on the right, we see this sun god Shamash. So notice in this theocracy, we're giving deference to this sun god Shamash. He's the one that has the most power. He's the one who's seated. He is much larger, and we can tell he's larger because even though he's seated, he is still eye to eye and the same size as Hammurabi. He has that super cool froyo hat, a much longer, more detailed beard, a very elaborate dress, so you can see the folds in his skirt right here, and he's also seated on a throne. So what is happening is Hammurabi has gone into this spiritual, supernatural realm. He's having some type of vision, and he's receiving physically those 384 new codes of law. So we see in what he's being received right here is the actual code, the stele itself. Now, what is in Hammurabi's hands are actually building tools. As you know, rulers, when they take over a new empire, one of their favorite things to do is to build new things. It's a really great way to assert power, to visually show your dominance, while also controlling people, resources, physical territory. Really, all of this is about proving Hammurabi has the ultimate power. He is the one able to enter the supernatural realm to visit the god. He's the one receiving the code of law. And what this does is it unites all of these different conquered territories under one umbrella of morality. And you don't want to defy the code of morality because then you come off as uncivilized or immoral. So it's a really great way to unite all these conquered territories. So this stele was created and copied several hundred times and placed outside of the capital into various other conquered territories in their capitals as a way to, again, unite those conquered territories, but also as political propaganda for Hammurabi. You hear my husband's tamales being microwaved right now? I love online learning. So the stele would be placed in these conquered territories where Hammurabi could not be present. And that should remind us of San Vitale. If you remember the mosaics of Justinian I, so the guy with the purple robe who's very serious, he's placed in Ravenna, Italy's San Vitale church because he can't physically be in Ravenna, Italy. He's over in Constantinople in Turkey. So placing yourself in these conquered territories is a way to assert your image and assert your dominance. And then, of course, the idea of this ruler entering the supernatural realm to unite political and sacred ideology, supernatural ideology, should remind us of Lady Zoc's ascension. She would give blood and enter that supernatural realm to make a political event sacred. It should remind us of ecstasy of Saint Teresa, having this full encompassing emotion of visiting the god or getting these, supernatural visions. Let's see. Oh, what's super brand new and innovative for the time is it's the first example of foreshortening that we see in art history. So if we look in Shamash's beard right here, those diagonal lines is the first time that we actually see foreshortening. And then, as you guys know, we don't see that again until Arena Scroveni, which is at the end of the 14th, 15th century. So several hundred years later is when we actually bring back foreshortening. So, and for me, there's a guy visiting this deity in a supernatural realm with very modern laws about minimum wage and like super scientific elements of foreshortening. I'm thinking he probably entered like the fourth dimension. He went and visited an alien. That's when we get those laws. Don't you give me that flag. So he enters this other world realm. We hear about in the Code of Law, innocent till proven guilty, the concept of minimum wage, divorce, how much you should pay an eye surgeon. If you do a good job, you get X amount of money. If you do a bad job, do you remember that they actually like poke your eyes out? That's where you get an eye for an eye. Is if an eye surgeon messes up, that, which by the way, they had eye surgeons, crazy. So if you mess up as an eye surgeon, then like you get an eye taken out. They would throw people into the River Jordan to see if they were telling the truth or not. And if you came out of the river, then the gods, the deities had chosen you and decided you were good. So that was a way to determine if you're good or bad. If you drowned in the River Jordan, then you were bad. The gods didn't choose to save you. Which, if you think of the Salem witch trials, it's very similar but different. So same but different. We would put the witches in water, and if they drowned, then they were not witches, and if they survived, then they were a witch, and so then we had to like set them on fire and kill them. Kind of a funny concept. Alright, yada 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 yada. I don't need to talk about Jahangir because he's not on our test this year. Yay! Alrighty, so function, placement, all of this is really to assert and legitimize Hammurabi's rule over Babylon, which covered several conquered territories. Alright, next one we're going to go over. So with this PowerPoint, I'm really just hitting the highlights of the ancient Mediterranean. I'm not going to cover every artwork. So one of the major players of Egypt is the Temple of Amun-Ra in Karnak. Now, it's a rectilinear structure, not just that the outside is rectangular, but if we look within the structure itself, we have very rectangular shaped buildings and rooms in it as well. It is a central axis, so a symmetrical line right down the middle, and that's where you're supposed to walk into it. So you start from the bottom and then work your way back. Now this was added on over time by several different pharaohs. This was a very important temple. It was a way to connect you to the gods. It was a visible reminder of your ability to build, control resources, control people, and it was a way for pharaohs to leave their mark. Particularly in Egypt, when a new pharaoh took over, they would relocate the capital and rebuild everything. We wanted to destroy every memory of the previous ruler, all of the buildings, everything they had done, because I'm this ultimate better person. So you could probably connect that to Thomas Jefferson's Monticello, the need to distance from British Baroque by welcoming the new French and American neoclassical architecture for this new democratic political movement of the United States of America. So this was one of the buildings that would not be destroyed when a pharaoh took over, because this was a temple. It was a very important temple to Amun. Amun was in charge of the harvest, in charge of a lot of the natural phenomena, both the sun and the water as well. So this would not be destroyed with a new emperor or a new pharaoh. Instead, it would be added on to. Now, it's originally designed as a mound arising from sacred waters. And if we think about sort of agriculture, so like the mound of agriculture and then the water sort of irrigated alongside it, which if we were still studying Asia, there's a ton of connections there that I won't come into, but this is meant to represent the beginning of time, the idea of like earth arising from the water, and then, you know, food source is our number one concern after that. How are we going to eat now that we have civilization? So once a year they had the Opet festival, which was post-harvest. So the gods would be exhausted from having helped everyone with the harvest. So we would ritualistically flood the surrounding area, and this would be the only thing visible, that mound arising from sacred waters. So they'd flood the surrounding area, sort of rejuvenate the surrounding area and rejuvenate the gods. The gods' statues themselves, like Amun and others, would be dressed, bathed, fed, given jewelry, and paraded between several of the temples. So if you remember from a video from a long time ago, they'd make that bed of like straw and papyrus and travel along some of the edges of the Nile River and along the axis between Luxor and Karnak. And so the gods would come and visit these temples, and it would be this great way for the pharaoh to come into contact with the deity that they are connected with. Because if you remember, the social belief and spiritual belief is that the pharaohs were in fact divine beings. They were incarnated from the gods to live on earth for us. The pharaohs weren't allowed to touch the ground. They had to be carried from place to place. If you remember, their skin turned to gold and their hair turned to lapis lazuli after they died. The pharaohs were incarnates of the god on earth. All right, yada, 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 yada. All right, that's good. So let's talk about how it's used, the intended function of the audience. So you start down at the bottom here and you'd enter. Notice the wide open courtyard. One of the ways we know it's a wide open courtyard is there's very minimal columns in here. Then we go up that central axis into this hallway. Notice how there's tons of dots, tons of columns. As we know, our vocab word for a hall filled with columns is a hypostyle hall. So let's talk about that hypostyle hall. So we've discussed hypostyle halls before. We talked about it with the Great Mosque of Cordoba in Spain. And then over here is the hypostyle hall from the Temple of Amun-Re, Karnak, Egypt, New Kingdom. So one of the main problems, we got a hall and it's filled with pillars, and our sacred temples love being dark. We love controlling light. Now, if you're drinking that ritualistic wine and you're wandering in here with very minimal light, can you see of a major problem we're gonna have? We can't see, and people start concussing themselves because they're hitting all these columns, and we can't see the central axis, and we can't see all the beautiful relief carvings and paintings. So they have this problem of this dark room that's filled with pillars. How are they going to solve it? How are we going to light it that doesn't compromise the interior? Because I can't just open up a window towards the top because then it's going to rain in there. That's not good either. And if I just put one oculus right here, it's going to shine straight down, and it's not going to really illuminate the entire central aisle. So I got to figure out a way to illuminate this entire central aisle. Can you think about what that is? We've talked about it for so many months. Please remember that vocab term. Can you? The clerestory. So the reason why the Temple of Amun-Re in Karnak, Egypt is so important is it comes up with the clerestory, this way to illuminate the central aisle of sacred architectures without compromising its sacredness. Because one of the main goals of especially ancient sacred architecture is to control light. So the clerestory is right along here. It's a series of windows. Notice this L shape that's sort of cut out right here. And then if I'm the sun, here go my sun over here. The sun is shining over here as it follows along the earth. So it shines in at a diagonal, hits through the clerestory, and then illuminates the central aisle. And we have that on either side. So we have one shining in here and one shining in here. And it hits all these windows, so illuminates the entirety of the central aisle without allowing rain to come inside because they are at a vertical. It's not an oculus where it just shines straight down, so I have all these diagonals coming in, while this side remains dark, so I still have that sense of controlling light. Now the reason why that's so important is a lot of our subsequent architectures are going to copy that concept. Christian churches are going to think that's a super cool idea for the basilica plan. which they borrow from the Romans, who also think it's a super cool idea. So my problem was I had a dark sacred space with a central axis, and my solution is the clerestory. That's a super important element for the Temple of Amun-Re in New Kingdom Egypt in modern-day Karnak. So we see that with Santa Sabina, one of our first Christian churches from the Byzantine era. So here goes my clerestory up here, so the light would shine down, illuminate the nave right here while keeping my aisles dimly lit to control light. We also see it with the Forum of Trajan in the Basilica Ulpia, the civic law courts. So here's in effect my clerestory with my light shining down into what will be a nave essentially, so this big open central space area. And that all comes from the ingenuity of the Egyptians in the New Kingdom. So here's what it looks like now. It was an extremely monumental architecture. It's one of the largest, longest standing architectures of all time. Do not feed that dog cheese. One of the largest long-standing architectures. Notice how monumental and megalithic these pillars are. So here goes my central axis down here. Notice the tulip-based columns that are going to be really influential for Persia. They're going to adopt that with the audience hall of Darius and Xerxes. Now at the entrance over here we see two very large sculptures of pharaohs. One of the ways we can tell they're a pharaoh is they have the pharaoh hats. They're also seated on thrones. They are idealized. There's an attempt to make them look muscular. You can see this guy's six-pack from far away. Now, you'll notice something quite interesting with this statue right here. Notice how his face has been chopped off, and that's not from time. It's not like his face just like fell off of this megalith. That was intentionally done by a subsequent pharaoh. So when a new pharaoh would take over, one of their favorite activities would be to destroy all the previous pharaohs' sculptures of themselves, sort of literally erasing previous history. And another way, or another reason behind that, it was essentially psychological and supernatural warfare. These sculptures would in effect hold the pharaoh's ka, hold the pharaoh's spirit within it. And if I chopped off the face, then it's just like opening up that spiritual vessel, so the spirit then floats out and it's not at rest. So if you really hated your predecessor, the person that came before you, you could destroy their Ka statue, and that unsettles their spirit, but it also deletes them from history. So it's a really interesting way to take over rule, is to just totally delete what you had before. I always thought that was really interesting about Egypt. So we won't ever make it to the MFA together, but if you go, the main room, the very first thing you see is a seated Egyptian pharaoh who's totally missing his head. And it's a very clean cut. It's almost straight across at the neck. So we know that that was done intentionally. It's not like his head just like fell off, he's dead. Like they intentionally cut his head off to release the spirit, but also delete him from history so people will no longer remember or talk about him anymore. So within the Temple of Amun-Re, we see very traditional carvings. So notice how our human figure is in composite stance, so shoulders this way, hips that way. That's meant to communicate as much information about the body as possible. Notice it's either low relief or in this case sunken relief. If you don't remember what sunken relief, it's the idea of carving the image so the image is lower and then the background actually comes further. Traditionally, in relief carving, we carve away the background so that the image is left and comes forward. But some people found that difficult, and instead of carving the background away, they carve the image away, and that's sunken relief. It's sunk inside the relief carving wall. So other traditional elements indicating this is regular Egypt, we have composite stance. We have registers, so those horizontal lines dividing the space. We have animal-headed gods, and it is a multiple amount of gods. As we know, what's our vocab term for having multiple gods? Casey, do you know what that term is?
Polytheistic.
Polytheistic. He's so smart. I love him. So they're a polytheistic religion. Let's see, anything else? Oh, we got, of course, our hieroglyphs, our multitude of gods, composite stance. Oh, our rulers. So here goes my ruler right here. This guy over here, which is funnily enough like begging for his life, we're showing the ruler as the calm victor, this muscular, idealized human that is calm amongst the chaos. That should remind us a little bit of Jesus in The Last Supper by Da Vinci. So that idea that our ruler is more than human, is divine, transcendent, strong, ideal, and perfect is all going to change when we go to dun dun dun, the Amarna period with Akhenaten. So Akhenaten takes rule and he starts drinking the crazy sauce. He eliminates all gods except one, Aten. So from a polytheistic religion, they come monotheistic, and instead of worshiping an animal-headed god, they start worshiping a circle that lives in the sky that sends magical pieces of knowledge out of it. I know you're thinking what I'm thinking. So here we see Aten at the center top of this image. They have little rays coming out. At the end of those rays are these little hook things right here. And the hook is going to the royal family, Akhenaten and his wife, who's probably Nefertiti, but we're not entirely sure because he had several. So he's the one in contact with Aten who's sending him that supernatural knowledge. You like my wink? And we're totally breaking from all of Egyptian tradition. One, we see a very intimate family portrait. Here we have Akhenaten kissing his young child, this very relaxed, emotional image of him and his wife together. They're seated, but not in thrones. They're in like these fluffy cushion things, having this very chillaxing time. We also see a less than idealized pharaoh. We can see the rolls in his stomach. We can see the pooch of his belly. So not the strong, ideal, divine victor. Now it's this regular person who has this regular jaunt with his family. We also see a break from following the registers. So notice how the babies are not along the registers. There's a sense of overlapping with the knees crossing each other. We're almost eliminating composite stance to make it look more naturalistic. And that's really outside of the norm for Egypt. Amarna period is all about breaking from the norm. Remember, it's fairly normal for pharaohs to do new things. They want to be seen as this new pharaoh who's going to do things new and different and wonderful and really benefit the people. But how do you think that people react to this level of change? Not well. They're not into it. There's too much change to religion, to how the pharaoh is shown, to the emotion of the pharaoh, how artwork is done. There's so much change that the people really rebel against it. And fairly quickly, they sort of murder him / he dies. He's dead, but under suspicious circumstances. And then King Tut takes the throne. Tutankhamun is the son of Akhenaten, but he's like son, cousin, weird inbreeding like the Habsburgs. So that attempt to purify the royal line doesn't work so well for them. But they do fairly quickly return back to normal after this experiment of this whole new form of Egyptian artwork. All right, moving on into Greece. So we've moved up in time. We're on to classical Greece. So I skipped a couple periods to hit one of the highlights from Greece, from the ancient Mediterranean, which is the Acropolis. So the Acropolis in Athens is like the town square of a really powerful city-state. Athens is a super powerful city-state, has won tons of wars. They're really proud of their military. And the Acropolis is this outcropping of public buildings at the top of the hill in Athens. So people don't live here. People would live at the bottom of the hill and constantly be looking up at the Acropolis. This is a place for gods to live, for leaders to live, for public gatherings, for our temple. So everything that was public or important happened in the Acropolis. Daily life happened down the hill. So it's purposely placed on the hill. We want to separate it from the profane ground, but also separate it from those low-class individuals. We want to get it closer to the gods. It also mimics how the gods lived. So the spiritual belief that gods lived on Mount Olympus is going to lead them to place the Parthenon in Athens on top of a mountain close to the gods. So we're doing that for several different reasons. But again, this is not where people lived in Athens. This is for important gathering spaces. This was a theocracy, so they're deferential to the gods. The gods are making political decisions. Sounds good. And it's also the birthplace of limited democracy. So only rich, wealthy landowners would be the ones making decisions, but at least someone outside of one dictator is making religion. So they're sort of making progress in a way. Our two most important buildings at the Acropolis are the Parthenon over here, which actually had two functions that we'll get into, and then way over here, right here at the entrance, that is where the Victory, or the Temple of Athena Nike Victory is, and we'll talk about that in a moment as well. So here goes our ancient Greek temple plan. I want to go over some vocab, function of the Parthenon in Athens. So around the edge is our colonnade. Colonnade is this series of columns, and then the stylobate is the walkway. And we want people to walk around the stylobate walkway because we had friezes of military victory all the way around. And so we wanted visitors to the Acropolis to be constantly looking at how fantastic Athenian military is. So we're seeing those relief carvings of military victory. Over here on the porch, fancy talk words are pronaos or proscenium. That's where we practice our rituals. So if you remember, we would pour libations out. We would use those crater vessels, pour the wine, and it comes out the bottom. Or we would also sacrifice animals. So all of that happened on the exterior front porch. We don't want to be spilling blood inside the cella. The cella is where the god or goddess lived. It was their house. It was their home. So we wouldn't be spilling blood or libations in here. After we spill the blood and libations, we go in, and on a one-to-one basis, we can go visit the deity. For the Parthenon in Athens, that deity is Athena. So they used to have a giant statue of Athena within the Parthenon in the Acropolis in Athens for us to visit on a one-to-one basis. So this area did not need to be very big. I didn't bring groups inside. I didn't lead speeches inside. I didn't drop off too many things inside. So it didn't need to be that large on the interior. So here goes what the Parthenon and the Acropolis looks like today. Notice it's very rectilinear, not just that the exterior is a rectangle, but inside it's very straight. A lot of the lines are very straight. Notice we have Doric columns, so Doric capitals at the top, with entasis at the bottom. So entasis, if you remember, so as opposed to our columns going straight up and down like this, they sort of bulged at the bottom. And that was meant to correct our vision. It makes it look taller and straighter when we're looking at it with our eye. The Athenian Greeks were really interested in math and using those mathematical proportions and techniques to correct our flawed vision, which is a fairly advanced model of thinking about architecture, especially monumental architecture, the need to correct our vision. So the exterior columns would actually be closer together. The pediment has a different angle. There's no right angles in this at all to correct our vision, because when we look at it, it looks that way. If you've ever looked at a skyscraper, it sort of looks like this because it's so tall. So they correct our vision, which somehow the bulge at the bottom fixes that. I don't know, me and math are not super close, so we're just gonna trust that the entasis does a really good job of making our pillars appear super straight by correcting our flawed vision. So we have the sculptures of Athenian military all around the friezes. So we use the stylobate to walk around and visit that stuff. Now on the main pediment, the west pediment, is the most famous pediment sculpture, which is Athena fighting Poseidon! I was really hoping you guys would get like paranoid that my video broke. So Athena is fighting Poseidon for sponsorship of Athens. This is really Athens bragging about, we are so dope and our military is so good that the gods are actually fighting for us. We could probably draw a connection to Henri IV receiving the portrait of Marie de Medici, where both Hera, Zeus, Jesus, and all of France is telling Henri IV that Marie de Medici is super cool. So this is really about Athens bragging about the two gods, Athena and Poseidon, fighting for control. So at the center of that pediment sculpture, we see Athena offering her olive branch while Poseidon comes in with his trident. And one of the reasons that's pretty important is it demonstrates the dual nature of rulership. The idea that you have to be both calm and peaceful, as well as strong and aggressive. And you have to have a balance of the two. If I could remind you guys of that egg analogy, if you're walking with the egg with too firm of a grip, then you're gonna crush it and like all your people are gonna die. But if you're too loose, you're too peaceful, then the egg's gonna fall out of your hand and all your people are gonna die. So you have to have this duality to yourself to really be successful. And we see that on the West Pediment sculptures, where Athena is offering the olive branch, that peace, against the aggressive violence of Poseidon, and ultimately Athena wins that argument. So that duality of the nature should remind us of King Tut. Remember his crook and flail? The crook is the like gentle sheep's herder tool, while the flail is that cat o' nine tails that will hurt you very harshly if you go against them. So that dual nature of the ruler. Also with the Endap of Meshi, the sword that's turned away, you have to be both pensive and at times violent to maintain your rule, but also protect your people. You can't be too loose, otherwise your people are not protected. Now, in addition to being the house of Athena in this sacred architecture, it also had a very secular function. It functioned as the treasury. So it held a lot of valuable goods inside, so when they sort of dig it up again, they find like ordered currency. So it wasn't a bank, but it was their treasury. They'd store important goods there, so a mix of sacred and secular together. It is eventually blown up by the Ottomans, who use it for, they're storing their explosives inside. I don't know why they thought that was a good idea, but they do. This is actually rebuilt one time. So Alexander the Great goes to Persia and demolishes Persepolis. The Persians then retaliate by coming to demolish, what's it called? Athens, and then it gets rebuilt again. So there's some bad blood there, if you will. So who eventually destroys it? It's the Ottomans who come afterward, who really blow it up with their incendiary devices on accident. All right, I'm gonna skip this one. I don't feel that it is super important. So at the entrance of the Acropolis, we find this miniature temple to Athena Nike. Now, Athena Nike is the victory, the strategic military form of the goddess, and she's placed at the entrance. Now, notice her wings are intentionally chopped off. See how there's smooth rock right here? So why would we want this goddess of protection to have her wings chopped off? Because we don't want her to fly away. We want her to continue protecting us. So she's placed in this smaller temple at the entrance. Notice how, again, it's very small. This is not meant for us to visit her. We would offer some libations and rituals on the pronaos or proscenium here up front, really just to appease her so she would continue protecting the Acropolis for us, this victory version of Nike. So Nike is actually Athena. It's just another form of her. It's the victory version of military genius. So notice there's some updates in our style. We can tell that the the victory temple of Athena Nike temple is built newer in time, so later, it's newer than all the other buildings. So one of the ways we can see that is the introduction of the Ionic capitals at the top. And we also see wet drapery, so this drapery that's sticking to the body. It was a way for Greece to show off two things. One, they're really good at sculpting the human form, which they're super into. But two, how well they can also sculpt drapery, so folds. So it's almost like best of both worlds on there, bragging about their artistic power. That should sort of remind us of the French Baroque period with Versailles. They need to brag about French artisans and those mirror makers in France. So again, it's their way to get like best of both worlds, which is sort of moving on into Hellenistic Greece territory. So Greece, well, ancient Mediterranean in general, is very interested in perfecting the human form. How do we do a good job of this? So if we start over here in Egypt, in Old Kingdom Egypt, we have King Menkaure and Queen. Remember, this was a statue found within the pyramids at Giza. It housed their Ka, their spirits inside of it, and this is meant to be their forever eternal body. So we want it to be idealized, so he's slightly muscular, he has this transcendent smile, almost the archaic smile on him, and there's the attempt to have him moving forward. So you see how his leg is sticking out slightly, but his knees are at the same level, his foot is on the ground, they're both still straight, so it's not accurate, it's not natural. There's the attempt to bring life to it because of its function. This is meant to house his body for eternity in the afterlife. So we want to bring it to life, and we want it to be a natural looking enough form that it looks like him, but it's the idealized version. We're just not quite there yet. We don't necessarily understand muscles yet. If you really look at this leg, we see the attempt at muscles in the knee, but it's not quite there. It's still a little bit stylized in the musculature. As we move up in time to archaic Greece, we're trying really hard to get some smooth transitions in the muscles. We're trying to get that stylized hair to at least fall naturalistically, but we still have that archaic smile, that transcendent smile, and we still have that rigid incipient movement. Incipient movement is sculptures having the potential for movement. So if you think about the Fang Bieri reliquary figure with their muscles like tense like this, that's incipient movement because they're still rigid, they're still still. But again, the knees are lined up, both legs are perfectly straight. We see some stylization in the muscles down here. So we're trying to make a naturalistic, idealized human. We're just not quite there. So reminder on the Anavisos Kouros, that functioned as a grave marker for a soldier. So at the base it says, for whom raging Ares did fall, yada yada yada. So Ares is the god of war. So this was a Greek soldier's grave marker. Again, Greece is all about the male form, male soldiers, military. It's their favorite thing. Now, as we move forward to classical Greece, I want you to notice what we're doing with the human figure. If we look at the knees, we are seeing a very naturalistic they're doing it fairly successfully. They're forming the muscles very naturalistically. They have very smooth transition. There's no stylization of the muscles. And we master that contrapposto stance, what I call the what's up stance. So the hip drops down, the shoulders tweak from side to side, one knee drops down as this leg is bearing all the weight, and it's reflected in the entire body. So if my hips move, it does something to my shoulders. If my legs move, it does something to my hips. They're all sort of connected. So this very idealized yet naturalistic attempt is very iconic for Greece, sort of this idealized naturalism, because this was not a real person. It was meant to be the ideal version of what could be a real person. Notice we're also changing the expression, so eliminating that creepy, archaic smile. and going towards this more vacant, expressionless, transcendent, emotionless expression. I've sort of used a lot of words there to indicate that it's possibly of divine use. Now, if we go forward to Hellenistic Greece, we see all this drama in the movement. Here, it's the incipient movement, the potential to move. Like, I could walk, but I'm just choosing, like, chill right now. Here, Winged Victory of Samothrace is moving. The wings are flown back, the shoulders are brought in, the hips are, the hips are squared to the wind. Remember that Winged Victory of Samothrace is placed on the naval coast as part of a fountain to honor naval victory. So she is really interacting with her environment in a very dramatic way. So we go from very rigid from Egypt and archaic Greece to this potential for movement, and then to very dramatic movement during the Hellenistic time period. Alrighty, I think this is our last one, the Forum of Trajan. So we're visiting Imperial Rome in Italy, and this whole complex is designed by Apollodorus of Damascus. So the Forum of Trajan, its function is a city civic center, so kind of similar to the Acropolis, where people don't live there. It's just a way to like gather important things like libraries, schools, markets, law courts, temples, all those things. It was the capital of the time, so it's in Rome, Italy. And it was a way for them to honor Trajan, who was their good ruler, their good emperor. Because if you remember, there's a difference between Republic Rome and then Imperial Rome. Republic Rome is run by the Senate. And then Augustus Suprema Porta comes along and says, hey, how about we put the emperor in charge? And that's where we get Imperial Rome. And what we're trying to do with the Forum of Trajan is justify how imperial rule is awesome, especially with Trajan. Look at all the amazing things he did. Look at all the military battles that he did, how much territory we have covered. And in the marketplace, we would see all these goods from all around the kingdom, like, oh my God, look at all the things we have because of Trajan. That's how important he is. So this is really a monument to Trajan posthumously, but really it's political propaganda on the success of Imperial Rome, of how we need to have one imperial emperor in charge making decisions. All right, move on. Apollodorus. So the reason why Apollodorus is tasked with this project is he had previously worked very closely with Trajan on building a bridge across the river Danube to conquer some major territory. So Apollodorus is a very well-known military engineer. So their first thought is to call him to design this complex honoring the military victories of Trajan. So let's talk about the layout. So you'd start here as a viewer at the bottom. You'd enter through this archway. So we see some spolia in this archway, stones and relief carvings taken from actually conquered territories and glued together as an honor to the military victories of Imperial Rome, but specifically Trajan. So we walk under this Arc de Triomphe, essentially, into this wide open courtyard. At the very center of that wide open courtyard is Trajan on a horse. Notice how he's on a horse, so that represents his military control, but he's wearing a toga, so his control over the Senate, his control over people, and his oratory stance. So he's addressing both the military and the Senate. So for imperial rule, it's all about the one emperor, in this case Trajan, having ultimate control over everything. So being able to control both the Senate and the military. And then surrounding that are a bunch of relief carvings, again, honoring his military victories. But he is the ultimate victor. That's why he is placed alone at the center, leading the charge. He is the strategic winner. He is the guy that ensures the success of Imperial Rome. Now over here is Trajan's Market. So on the bottom level are shops, so you can buy all of these variety of goods that have come from all over this huge conquered territory. So something like 40% of human population. So you can buy all these different goods there. And so as you're walking around the market, you're thinking, wow, thank God that Trajan conquered all these territories, because now I have all these things. It's so exotic, we're so cultural. So it's, again, just a memorial, not a memorial, a sort of honor to all he has conquered for Rome, what he has done for us. So that's on the ground level. On the top level are civic offices, so you'd see all these homies in togas walking around. Again, Trajan has ultimate control over them. As we move forward to the Basilica Ulpia, it's the first time they come up with a basilica, and it's done as a law court. So at either end is the apse, that's where the judge goes, and then all the civic duties, the criminals, people who are filing lawsuits, people who are getting married, transferring property, they'd be in this central open area that will later become known as the nave in Christian churches. So notice the stacking interiors, the clerestory. We have a very Augusta Suprema Porta looking individual on the inside. Now move back here, and this is the column of Trajan. So it's that long spiraling column over here, and it's all about his military victories. Now I want you to notice that we're right next to the libraries, so truth and goodness. And then over here is the Temple of Trajan, so divine approval. So we place this column of his military victory right next to the library, so fact, truth, science, goodness, righteousness. And then also next to the divine temple, his divinity, righteousness, approval by gods, justifying his rule. And you'd be able to walk up inside and actually look out and see the extent of everything that Trajan has created. So this complex was really important to assert the value of imperial Rome and imperial rule, that if we put one guy in charge as opposed to the whole Republic Senate, then we get stuff done, and good stuff for Rome. So yada yada yada, notice the clerestory, yada yada yada, Corinthian capitals, yada yada yada, very similar to Athens and the Acropolis, yada yada yada. Here go the markets. Again, this is goods from all over the territory, talking about the breadth of imperial Roman territory thanks to Trajan. And then here goes Trajan's column. So it's a spiraling continuous narrative around it, and discussing his military rule. And at the very top, we see Trajan as the military emperor. So he's in the oratory stance, but he's wearing his military garb as well, made out of bronze. Bronze is used for weapons. At the base of this sculpture are carvings of all the enemy's weapons, and all the enemies are actually shown very strong as well, because you want to be seen as the strong victor against a strong opponent. You don't want to be seen like you just pick on the little guy and you win by default. You want to be seen as strong by beating a strong enemy. So all of that is spiraling around. You'd be able to walk up inside of it. There are stairs in there. There are windows along, so window, 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 window. And you can see the temple, the markets, the library, everything that imperial Roman rule has done for Rome. All of the things that Trajan has done for us. Alrighty, so that's the end. Ooh, the lighting is so bad. I look like Voldemort because I have no nose. Alright, so that's the end of Ancient Mediterranean, and I hope to hear from you guys soon. Love you, miss you. Bye.